The Family Feud stage was already loud when Steve Harvey walked through the lights in a dark suit, straightened his jacket, and gave the audience that look that usually meant he had noticed something before anybody else had. "How y'all doing?" The crowd cheered. Steve nodded, walked toward center stage, then stopped halfway between the two families waiting at their podiums. On his left stood the Brooks family from Atlanta. They were smiling, waving, talking to the audience, talking to each other, and somehow all doing it at the same time. On his right stood the Miller family from Columbus, Ohio. They were smiling too, but they were standing in a nearly perfect line, name tag straight, hands on the podium, ready for the first question. Steve looked left, then right, then left again. I ain't even started the game, and I can already tell y'all don't do events the same way. The audience laughed. Denise Brooks, the captain on the left, called out, "That's because we know how to have fun, Steve." Carol Miller, captain on the right, immediately answered, "We have fun too. We just know what time it starts." The audience exploded. Steve froze. Slowly he lowered the question card in his hand. Oh, he looked into the camera. "We got ourselves a show today." He walked over to Denise. "Miss Denise, where were you last weekend?" "A wedding." Steve Harvey on White Weddings versus Black Weddings dramatized script. Whose wedding? "My nephew Marcus." Steve turned to Carol. "Miss Carol, where were you last weekend?" "Also a wedding." "My niece Emily." Steve nodded. "Okay, 2 weddings." "Perfect. What time did your invitation say the wedding started?" Carol answered immediately. 4 o'clock. "What time did the ceremony start?" 4 o'clock. Steve stared at her. "Exactly?" "Exactly." He took one slow step backward. Then he turned toward Denise. Denise was already laughing. Steve pointed at her. "Don't you say nothing yet." The crowd laughed harder. "What time did your invitation say?" 4. "What time did it start?" Denise tried to stop smiling. "About 5:15. Steve threw the question card onto the podium. "See, we ain't even need the survey board." The studio erupted. Denise held up both hands. People was getting there. Carol's eyes widened. "For an hour and 15 minutes? Denise turned toward her. "Baby, some people had traffic." Steve jumped between them. Wait. I need to understand this. Miss Carol, if the invitation says 4, what time are you in your seat?" 3:45. Steve Harvey on White Weddings verse Black Weddings dramatized script. Steve nodded. "Okay, Miss Denise?" "Depends." Steve closed his eyes. "That word right there is where the trouble starts. Depends on what? How close I am to the bride." "If you're close, 3:30. If you're not close, 4:15. Carol gasped. Steve turned toward her. "Don't look at me. I didn't raise her." The audience roared. The first survey question had not even appeared, and the two families were already laughing across the stage. That was when Steve noticed the 2 people standing second from each captain. Jasmine Brooks, 29, was trying not to look at Ethan Miller, 31. Ethan was trying not to look at Jasmine. They were both failing. Steve narrowed his eyes. "Hold on." He pointed at Jasmine. "You know him?" Jasmine smiled. "Yes." Steve pointed at Ethan. "You know her?" "Very well." Steve looked from one family to the other. "How well?" Ethan held up his left hand, showing nothing. Jasmine held up hers. An engagement ring caught the stage lights. The audience screamed. Steve stepped back so fast the crowd laughed again. "Oh Lord, y'all ain't just competing against each other. Y'all about to become related." Jasmine nodded. "In 8 weeks. Steve looked at Denise. Steve Harvey on White Weddings verse Black Weddings dramatized script. Then Carol. Then at the ceiling. 8 weeks? And y'all already arguing about what time a wedding starts?" Carol said, "That is not our only disagreement." Denise nodded. "Not even top 5. Steve slowly picked his question card back up. "Well, forget what production had planned. I got questions." The audience cheered. He walked to the face-off podium. "Let's play feud." The first official survey appeared. We asked 100 married people, name something wedding guests secretly judge. Denise hit the buzzer before Steve finished the last word. "Food." Ding. Number 1 answer. The Brooks family exploded. Denise pointed at the board. Exactly. Steve looked at her. You knew that awfully fast. Because people remember bad wedding food forever. Her brother Reggie leaned toward his microphone. Forever? Steve walked over. You sound hurt. Reggie nodded solemnly. Dry chicken. 1998. Steve stared at him. You remember chicken from 1998? It squeaked when I cut it. The audience broke into laughter. Carol said, Our chicken was not dry. Reggie turned toward her. I didn't say it was your chicken. You looked at me. I was looking in your direction. Steve stepped between them. This man got 30 years of poultry trauma and somehow you made it personal. The Brooks family chose to play. Steve Harvey on White Weddings versus Black Weddings dramatized script. Jasmine answered, Music, ding, number 2. Her cousin Kiara said, The bride's dress, ding, number 4. Reggie said, The bar, ding, number 5. Then Steve reached Grandma Evelyn Brooks, 74, dressed in deep burgundy and wearing the expression of a woman who had attended enough weddings to qualify as an expert witness. Miss Evelyn, name something wedding guests secretly judge. Other wedding guests. Ding, number 3. Steve threw his head back. That's the truth right there. The audience applauded. Grandma Evelyn nodded. They pretend they're looking at flowers. They looking at who gained weight, who got divorced, who came with somebody they said they was done with, and who wore that dress knowing better. Steve had to walk away from the podium. Miss Evelyn, what church do you go to? New Hope Baptist. Ain't no hope in what you just described. The crowd screamed. 3 strikes later, the Millers got a chance to steal. Carol gathered her family. Seating chart, she said confidently. Steve looked at her. People judge the seating chart? Absolutely. You ever sat at somebody else's wedding and thought, this table placement is unacceptable? Carol hesitated. Her daughter Megan leaned into the microphone. She has. Carol looked at her. Megan. At my wedding. Steve's eyes widened. Your own daughter's wedding? Megan nodded. She moved Uncle Gary 3 times. Steve Harvey on White Weddings versus Black Weddings dramatized script. Uncle Gary, standing at the far end of the Miller line, said, I kept getting downgraded. The audience laughed. Steve turned toward Carol. What's wrong with Uncle Gary? Carol said, Nothing, he talks to strangers. Gary shrugged. That's how strangers become friends. Carol replied, Not during the father-daughter dance. Steve wiped his eyes. Carol finally gave her answer. Seating arrangement. Psst. The Brooks family won the round. Denise immediately shouted, Because nobody care where they sit. Carol stared at her. People absolutely care where they sit. At our weddings, people move. Why? Because they get there and see who they sitting with. Steve stepped forward. Now we talking. Explain. Kiara raised her hand. You got the aunt who says, Why am I over here? Then, she moves. Then somebody's ex is too close to somebody's current husband, so they move. Then grandma says she can't see the dance floor, so she moves. Then the cousins drag 2 chairs from another table. Grandma Evelyn added, And don't put me behind no plant. Jasmine sighed. Nobody put you behind a plant. I could feel leaves. The audience erupted. Steve turned toward Carol. At y'all's wedding you sit where the card says? Yes, whole dinner? Yes. He turned toward Grandma Evelyn. Miss Evelyn? She shook her head with genuine amazement. They got assigned seats like school. Steve doubled over laughing. The second round made things worse. Name something that can make a wedding reception run late. Steve Harvey on White Weddings verse. Black Weddings dramatized script. Ethan buzzed first. Photographs, ding, number 1. Steve nodded. There you go. Ethan looked at Jasmine. Your cousin's wedding. Jasmine pointed at him. Don't start. Steve immediately started. No, start. What happened? Ethan smiled. Dinner was supposed to be at 6. Steve nodded. We ate at 7:47. The Miller family gasped as if he had announced a crime. Steve turned toward Denise. 7:47? There were photographs. For almost 2 hours? Big family. Carol asked, How many photographs can one family take? Denise looked offended. You got bride and groom, bride with mama, bride with grandma, bride with aunties, bride with cousins, bride with church ladies, bride with people who call themselves aunties but ain't technically aunties. Then groom sighed. Steve raised a hand. Hold on. We got technical and non-technical aunties? Jasmine nodded. Absolutely. Steve turned to Carol. Do y'all have that? Carol said, we have aunts. Steve slowly faced the camera. That's different. The audience exploded again. The Millers played the round. Megan answered, the ceremony starts late. Ding, Tom Miller said, someone gives a speech that's too long. Ding, Steve nodded, now that's universal. Uncle Gary said, transportation. Ding, Steve Harvey on white weddings versus black weddings dramatized script. Then Carol answered, people not following the schedule. Zzz, Steve laughed. You tried to sneak your whole personality onto the board. Carol shrugged. It was worth a shot. The Brooks family stole with the DJ. Then Denise leaned across the stage. Can I ask her a question? Steve pointed at Carol. You want to ask your future-in-law? Go ahead. Denise said, at Megan's wedding, how long was cocktail hour? Carol answered, exactly 60 minutes. Grandma Evelyn whispered loudly, there they go with clocks again. The crowd lost it. Carol was laughing now too. How long is yours? Denise replied, till we ready. Steve stepped between them. No, see, that's not a unit of time. Reggie said, it is in Atlanta. Steve pointed at him. You are not helping. By the commercial break. Producers had realized the wedding conversation was funnier than anything they could have planned. They brought Steve a card with a special lightning round question collected from the show's audience before taping. Steve returned to center stage. All right, we got a special one. Since these two are getting married, I asked the folks backstage to give me a question just for y'all. Jasmine groaned. Oh no. Steve smiled. Oh yes. He read the card. Name something people notice is different between weddings in different families. The audience clapped. Steve looked at Denise and Carol. I am saying families. Everybody hear me? Families. I'm not about to let y'all turn me into a sociologist. The crowd laughed. We're talking about these two families standing right here. He pointed at the Brookses. The Brooks family. Then the Millers. The Miller family. Steve Harvey on white weddings visitors. Black weddings dramatized script. He brought Denise and Carol to the buzzer. Ready? Both nodded. Name something that's different between weddings in different families. They buzzed almost at the same time. Denise shouted, food. Carol shouted, timing. Steve stared at them. You two are never going to agree on nothing. The board showed timing at number 1 and food at number 2. Both women celebrated. Steve looked disgusted. Don't celebrate together now. Y'all caused this. The audience laughed. Because the Millers had the higher answer, they played. Ethan said, music, ding. Megan said, dress code, ding. Tom said, how many people are invited? Ding. Gary said, how long people stay? Ding. Then Carol thought for a moment. Speeches, ding. Steve nodded. Okay, what is different about speeches? Carol smiled. At our family weddings, they're usually scheduled. Best man, maid of honor, father of the bride. Short. Denise laughed before Steve even looked at her. He turned. What's wrong? Short. Y'all don't do short speeches? Reggie shook his head. People get inspired. Inspired by what? Steve Harvey on white weddings vs. black weddings dramatized script microphone access. Steve slapped the podium. There it is. Denise said, you give Uncle Leon a microphone, you might hear about the marriage, the bride when she was 6, the groom's football team, gas prices, and a scripture. Steve looked horrified. How long? Grandma Evelyn answered, depends how much he's had to drink. Steve pointed at the audience. This family keep using depends. That's why nothing starts on time. The Brooks family got the steal when Kiara answered, dancing, ding, final answer. Steve looked across both podiums. Now dancing. This is where I expect trouble. Carol said, we dance. Denise folded her arms. Do you? Carol laughed. Yes, Steve turned to Ethan. What happened at your sister's wedding? Ethan said, there was dancing. Jasmine added, after dinner. Well, when else would you dance? Carol asked. Denise answered immediately. Whenever the song hits. Steve made a face. What does that mean? Reggie explained. If the DJ plays the right song while people eating, somebody's getting up. Carol stared at him. During dinner? A plate can wait. A song can't. The audience roared. Steve walked away again. A plate can wait. A song can't. That's going on a t-shirt. Then Jasmine said something that took the joke in a new direction. This is exactly why we're in trouble. Steve stopped. What kind of trouble? She glanced at Ethan. He nodded. Steve Harvey on White Weddings verse. Black Weddings dramatized script. We have 2 different wedding plans. Steve turned slowly. Excuse me? Ethan explained. Not officially, but basically. Carol looked defensive. Denise did too. Jasmine continued. My mom has one version. His mom has another. Steve looked at the mothers. You got competing weddings? Denise said no. Carol said not competing. At the same time. Steve waited. The audience laughed. He said, whenever 2 people say not competing together, they competing. Jasmine reached beneath the podium and pulled out 2 binders. One was burgundy and stuffed with handwritten notes, fabric swatches, menu printouts, photographs, sticky notes, and what appeared to be a church program from 2007. The other was white, tabbed, labeled and divided into sections: venue, guests, timeline, vendors, contingency. Steve looked at the white binder. Contingency? Carol nodded. Backup plans. For a wedding? Rain, vendor delay, transportation issue, medical issue, power outage. Steve stared at her. Ma'am, are y'all getting married or launching a space shuttle? The audience howled. Then he picked up Denise's binder. A loose sheet fell out. Steve picked it up. What is this? Denise said. Potential songs. Steve unfolded it. It was 3 pages. Potential songs? This is a radio station. Steve Harvey on White Weddings verse Black Weddings dramatized script. Reggie shouted. And that's the short list. Steve looked at Jasmine. What do you and Ethan want? Jasmine smiled weakly. Something in between. What does that look like? Ethan said. We don't know anymore. The audience's laughter softened. Steve noticed. That's not funny. Jasmine nodded. No. How bad did it get? She looked at Ethan again. We almost decided to go to the courthouse last week. Both families went quiet. Steve's expression changed. Because of wedding planning? Because everybody was planning except us. For a moment, there was no laughter. Then Steve turned toward both mothers. Let me ask something. How did y'all get from we love you to we got 2 binders and the couple about to escape through a courthouse window? The audience laughed, but the question landed. Carol looked down. Denise crossed her arms, then uncrossed them. Steve walked to Jasmine. Give me one example. Jasmine took a breath. Guest list. Steve nodded. How many people you want? About 175. He turned to Carol. How many you got? 128. Steve nodded. That sounds close. Then he turned to Denise. Denise smiled. Steve Harvey on White Weddings versus Black Weddings dramatized script. How many? 296. The studio erupted. Steve froze. 296 what? People, I know they people. I'm hoping you about to say appetizers. Denise laughed. Big family. Jasmine said, Mom originally had 380. Steve staggered backward. You cut 84 people and still got 300? Denise nodded proudly. I made sacrifices. Grandma Evelyn said, she cut church people first. Denise spun toward her, Mama. Steve laughed. Now church knows where they stand. Carol said, 300 people changes everything. Venue, catering, parking, budget. Denise said, I understand that. Then why 300? Denise hesitated. Because if I don't invite some people, I have to hear about it for 10 years. Steve nodded slowly. Okay, that's actually believable. Reggie added, 15. What? Some people hold grudges. The audience laughed. Steve asked for another example. Ethan said dinner. Carol wanted a plated meal because she liked predictable service and a calmer room. Denise wanted a buffet because she did not trust one plate to represent everybody's appetite. Steve looked at Denise. You don't trust a plate? You give Reggie 3 pieces of asparagus and a chicken breast and tell him that's dinner. You're going to have a problem. Reggie nodded. Immediate problem. Carol said, it's a reception, not a restaurant. Steve Harvey on White Weddings vs. Black Weddings dramatized script. Reggie replied, if I leave hungry, it's a meeting. The audience exploded. Steve slapped his card against his leg. That's another t-shirt. Then came cake. Carol wanted a small, elegant cake and a separate dessert table. Denise asked why anybody needed dessert after cake. Carol said cake was only one dessert. Grandma Evelyn looked genuinely puzzled. Cake is dessert. Megan said, but you can also have cookies, pie, brownies. Grandma Evelyn frowned. After cake? Yes, why? Megan opened her mouth, then stopped. Steve pointed at Grandma Evelyn. She got you questioning your whole childhood. The studio laughed. Then came the open bar. Carol wanted beer, wine, and 2 signature cocktails. Denise wanted beer, wine, 2 signature cocktails, champagne, and what she called something for the uncles. Steve immediately asked, what is something for the uncles? Reggie looked away. Denise said, they know. Steve stared at Reggie. Sir? Reggie shook his head. I don't discuss family logistics on television. The audience lost it. Steve looked back at Carol. What about music? That was the most dangerous subject. Carol wanted a string trio during cocktail hour and a professional wedding DJ afterward. Denise agreed with the string trio. Then she said, DJ Marcus after dinner. Carol asked, who is DJ Marcus? Steve Harvey on White Weddings vs. Black Weddings dramatized script. The entire Brooks family reacted at once. Steve raised both hands. Hold on, why y'all offended because she don't know this man? Denise explained that DJ Marcus had played every major Brooks family event since 2009. Birthdays, graduations, anniversaries, retirement parties, family reunions. One funeral repast. Steve looked at her. He DJ'd a repast? Denise nodded. It got more upbeat later. Steve looked into the camera. That's all I'm going to say about that. Carol wanted a DJ with a contract, liability insurance, backup equipment, and an online portal. Denise said DJ Marcus had a contract. Carol asked to see it. Denise showed her a text message that read, I got y'all. Marcus. Steve nearly dropped his microphone. That's the contract? Reggie said, he gave his word. Carol said, and what if his equipment breaks? Denise replied, he got another speaker in his van. Carol looked at Steve. Steve held up his hand. Don't involve me, I'm enjoying this. The audience cheered. But the deeper problem was not food, timing, music, or guest lists. It was that both mothers believed they were defending the couple. Carol had been the organizer in her family for 20 years. When somebody graduated, she booked the restaurant. When a relative needed a hotel block, Carol had rates before anyone asked. When Megan got married 3 years earlier, Carol had built a spreadsheet so detailed that the photographer jokingly asked if she could manage his business. Denise had been the social center of her family just as long. She knew who was no longer speaking to whom, which cousins needed rides, which aunt could be trusted with decorations, who had dietary restrictions, who would forget to RSVP, who would show up anyway, and which older relatives would need a chair near the aisle. Both women were good at taking care of people. Steve Harvey on White Weddings vs. Black Weddings dramatized script. That was the problem. Neither one knew how to stop. Steve looked at the couple. When was the last time y'all made a wedding decision without calling one of these two? Jasmine and Ethan looked at each other. The audience began laughing before either answered. Ethan said, the proposal. Steve nodded. That was before the wedding planning started. Exactly. Steve turned toward Denise and Carol. Y'all done turned love into a committee meeting. The audience applauded. Then Megan Miller raised her hand. Steve, I have evidence. Steve's eyes lit up. Evidence? She pulled out her phone. Jasmine immediately covered her face. Oh no. Steve walked toward Megan. Whenever somebody brings out a phone on this stage, somebody's weekend is about to get worse. The crowd laughed. Megan said the siblings and cousins had created a private group chat called Operation Get Them Married. Steve stared at her. That sounded like a hostage rescue. It started as a joke. Kiara shouted from the brook's side, "Don't read everything." Steve pointed at her. "Now I'm reading everything." Megan scrolled. First message from Jasmine after a planning meeting. "If one more adult asks me the difference between burgundy and wine, I am canceling the wedding and serving pizza at City Hall." The audience howled. Denise defended herself. "They are different colors." Carol quietly said, "They are." Steve looked at both women. Steve Harvey on White Weddings verse. Black Weddings dramatized script. See? Y'all can agree when it's least useful. Megan read another message from Ethan. "Mom just sent me version 14 of the timeline. I don't know what happened to versions 9 through 13, and I'm afraid to ask." Carol laughed. They were drafts. Steve turned to her. "How many timelines does one wedding need?" "One final timeline." "Then why 14? "Because you have to get to the final one." Steve shook his head. Megan read a message from Kiera. "Aunt Denise just added 6 people because she ran into them at the grocery store." Denise raised her hand. "That is misleading." Steve looked at her. "How?" "It was 4 at the grocery store and 2 at church." The studio exploded. Even Carol had to lean against the podium laughing. Then Megan's expression softened. "There's one serious one." Steve nodded. She read a message Jasmine had sent 2 weeks earlier. "Everybody keeps saying they're doing this for us, but I don't feel like anybody is listening to us." The studio grew still. Jasmine looked down. Steve let the silence sit for a moment. Then he asked Denise, "Did you know she felt like that?" "Not until afterward." "Carol?" "No," Megan continued. "The next message is Ethan. I love both families. I just don't want our wedding to feel like a competition somebody else is trying to win." Steve nodded. He looked at both mothers. Steve Harvey on White Weddings versus Black Weddings dramatized script. "That's the part right there. Y'all ain't bad people. That's what makes this hard. You both trying to help. But help that nobody asked for can start feeling like control." There was applause. Denise sighed. "He's right." Carol nodded. "He is." Steve smiled. "I know. That's why they gave me this job." The laughter returned. Then Grandma Evelyn raised one finger. "Can I tell you why Denise is acting crazy?" Denise spun around. "Mama." Steve immediately moved closer. "Yes, ma'am." "Please." Grandma Evelyn ignored her daughter. Jasmine's daddy loved weddings. The mood softened. Denise's husband, Marcus Sr., had died 5 years earlier from a sudden heart attack. He had been the loudest man at every family event, the one who got people onto the dance floor, carried extra chairs from the garage, tasted food before guests arrived, and always stayed until cleanup was finished. He used to joke that Jasmine's wedding would require a permit and 2 parking lots. Jasmine smiled through tears. Steve looked at Denise. "You trying to give her the wedding her daddy talked about?" Denise nodded. "I know he isn't here. I know that. But every time we cut something I hear him saying, 'We ain't doing my baby cheap.'" Jasmine walked over and hugged her mother. The audience applauded softly. Steve turned toward Carol. "What about you? Why everything got to be timed to the minute?" Tom Miller cleared his throat. Carol looked at him. "Don't." Steve's eyebrows rose. "That means do." The audience laughed. Tom smiled. "Our wedding was a disaster." Carol covered her eyes. "Not the marriage," Tom clarified quickly. "The wedding." Steve Harvey on White Weddings verse. Black Weddings dramatized script. The crowd laughed. They had married when Carol was 21 and Tom was 23. The photographer failed to show up. The caterer delivered the wrong meal. It rained. The community hall lost power for 20 minutes. A cousin plugged too many things into one outlet. The cake leaned and eventually collapsed onto a tray of dinner rolls. Steve stared at him. "Cake on the rolls?" Tom nodded. "Buttercream everywhere." Steve looked at Carol. "And you survived all that?" "Barely. So now you think if you plan every minute, nothing can go wrong." Carol nodded reluctantly. "I just don't want Ethan and Jasmine to spend their wedding day fixing problems." Steve smiled. "That's love too." Denise looked across the stage at Carol differently now. For months, she had thought Carol wanted a quiet, restrained wedding because she disliked the Brooks family's style. Carol had thought Denise wanted a huge, loud reception because she did not respect budgets or plans. Neither was true. One woman was trying to preserve a memory. The other was trying to prevent one. Steve turned to Jasmine and Ethan. Now that we know why they're crazy, what y'all want to do? The audience laughed. Jasmine wiped her eyes. We made rules. Steve perked up. Rules? Ethan pulled a folded sheet of paper from his jacket. Denise looked surprised. You made wedding rules? Jasmine nodded. Last night. Steve took the paper. Rule number 1. Nobody adds a guest without asking the bride and groom. He looked at Denise. The audience laughed. Denise sighed. Fine. Rule number 2. Nobody changes the schedule without asking the bride and groom. Steve Harvey on White Weddings VIFs. Black Weddings dramatized script. Steve looked at Carol. Carol nodded. Fair. Rule number 3. Every family tradition has to come with an explanation of why it matters. Steve nodded. I like that. Rule number 4. If the explanation is because that's how we always do it, the couple can reject it with no argument. Grandma Evelyn whispered. That's dangerous. The audience laughed. Rule number 5. 1 hour of the reception has no schedule. Carol made a face. Steve caught it. Miss Carol. I'm processing. Process faster. The crowd roared. Rule number 6. DJ Marcus gets a real contract. Denise laughed. Reggie shouted, he ain't gonna like that. Rule number 7. Nobody says white wedding or black wedding like one is the correct way and the other is a problem. Steve nodded seriously. That's the rule. Because families got habits, regions got habits, cultures got traditions, but ain't nobody one size fits all. We laughing at these two families because they're funny, not because every person in America does what they do. The audience applauded. Then he smiled again. Now that we handled the responsible part, let's get back to the funny part. The studio cheered. Producers put a new rapid-fire board on the screen, Wedding Showdown. Steve looked delighted. Oh, they done made graphics. The first category was arrival time. Steve read, your invitation says the ceremony starts at 4. What's the latest you can arrive without feeling late? Steve Harvey on White Weddings versus Black Weddings dramatized script. He pointed to Carol. 3:55, she said. Steve looked confused. That's before 4. Exactly, he turned to Denise. 4:10. Carol grabbed the podium. Steve held up his hand. Don't argue. We're collecting data. Reggie said, 4:20 if parking bad. Gary said, 3:45. Grandma Evelyn said, I get there when the bride's mama tells me to. Steve nodded. Finally, a diplomat. Next category, RSVP. You invited 100 people. How many do you expect without chasing them? Carol answered, 95. Denise laughed so hard she couldn't speak. Steve looked at her. What's funny? 985. What number you got? 60 answer. 25 tell somebody else. 15 call the week before. 8 just appear. Steve counted on his fingers. That's more than 100. Exactly, the crowd roared. Carol stared. People come without responding? Denise said, of course. How do you know how much food to order? Reggie answered, you order extra food. Carol looked genuinely alarmed. How much extra? Depends. Steve shouted, there's that word again. The audience screamed. Next category, the DJ. Can a guest request a song? Steve Harvey on White Weddings versus Black Weddings dramatized script. Carol said, sure if it fits the event. Denise said, sure if Marcus likes you. Steve froze. The DJ got personal veto power? Reggie nodded. Absolute power. Megan said, that is not professional. Kiara replied, it is efficient. Steve had to stop the argument. Next category, the line dance. Steve said, somebody starts a line dance. What happens? The Brooks family all answered at once. Everybody gets up. Steve turned to the Millers. Megan said, some people get up. Gary said, I watch first. Reggie pointed at him. That's your problem. You can't study a line dance. You got to commit. Gary defended himself. I need to understand the pattern. Steve said, this man approached dancing like a tax form. The audience roared. Next category, speeches. How long is too long? Carol, 5 minutes. Tom, 7. Megan, 4. Steve looked at the Brooks side. Denise said, depends who's speaking. Steve grabbed his chest. I knew it. Reggie said, if grandma talking, no limit. Grandma Evelyn nodded. Correct. Steve asked, what about Uncle Leon? Denise and Reggie yelled together, 3 minutes. The audience exploded. Next category, take-home food. Carol looked confused by the category itself. Steve noticed. Steve Harvey on White Weddings verse. Black Weddings dramatized script. Miss Carol. What's wrong? Take-home food? Denise turned toward her. You don't have plates? At a wedding? Denise looked toward the audience in disbelief. Grandma Evelyn said, oh baby. Steve already knew the room was about to collapse. Carol asked, people take food home from weddings? Reggie said, if there is food left. Carol replied, the caterer handles leftovers. Denise gasped. You let the caterer take the macaroni? Steve bent over the podium. I can't do this. Reggie said, that's money leaving the building. Megan laughed. We don't bring containers to weddings. Kiara said, nobody said bring them. Sometimes the family provides them. Steve lifted his head slowly. The family provides to-go containers? Denise said, if they're organized. Steve pointed at Carol. See? There's your common ground. The audience gave one of the biggest laughs of the day. The next question nearly ended the show. Steve read, what happens when the reception officially ends? Carol answered, people leave. Denise stared at her. Steve looked at Denise. What? Nothing, say it. Everybody don't leave. Carol asked, if the reception ended, where do they go? Reggie answered, depends who's got a house nearby. Steve spun in a circle. Steve Harvey on White Weddings versus Black Weddings dramatized script. There it is. The audience was screaming. Denise explained that after some family weddings, the younger cousins might continue somewhere else, while older relatives gathered at somebody's house and discussed the wedding they had just attended. Carol laughed. Discuss what? Grandma Evelyn said, everything. Steve pointed at her, including other guests. We covered this. Grandma Evelyn nodded. Especially other guests. Then the game moved into a more serious round, but even that produced comedy. Name something newlyweds argue about in the first year. Ethan buzzed first. Money, ding, number 1. Jasmine answered, housework, ding, number 2. Steve asked which one of them was messier. Both pointed at Ethan. The audience laughed. Ethan protested. I'm organized. Jasmine said, your desk is organized. Your socks are independent contractors. Steve clutched his chest. Independent contractors. Jasmine continued, they work wherever they want. Steve looked at Ethan. You got free-range socks. The crowd roared. Other answers included in-laws, temperature in the house, spending, and what to eat for dinner. When in-laws appeared on the board, Steve slowly looked at Denise and Carol. Both women raised their hands. We understand, Carol said. Denise added, we working on it. Steve nodded. That's all anybody can do. Then the final answer on the board was holidays. Steve looked at the couple. Oh, y'all ain't even got to Christmas yet. Jasmine groaned. Steve Harvey on White Weddings versus Black Weddings dramatized script. Ethan said, we have a spreadsheet. Steve immediately turned toward Carol. Carol raised both hands. That one was his idea. Ethan nodded proudly. Steve looked disappointed. It's genetic. The audience laughed. The Brooks family ultimately won the game by 12 points. Reggie celebrated like they had won a championship. He ran down the line high-fiving everybody, then pointed at Carol. We'll save you a plate. Carol laughed. As long as dinner is before 8. Denise shouted, no promises. Steve stepped between them. We just spent an hour making progress. The crowd roared. Before the families left the stage, Steve called Jasmine and Ethan to center. Y'all still getting married? Yes, they answered together. Same day? Yes, Steve looked at the mothers. Same day? Denise said, yes. Carol said, absolutely. Steve pointed at Denise. What time? 4. What time is it starting? Denise smiled. The audience began laughing. She sighed. 4, exactly? I will personally be seated at 3:45. Carol cheered. Steve held up a hand. Don't celebrate yet. He turned to Carol. What time does the dance floor open? Steve Harvey on White Weddings verse. Black Weddings dramatized script. Carol smiled. Whenever the right song comes on. The Brooks family screamed. Steve nodded slowly. Now that's compromise. The audience applauded, but the biggest test was still 8 weeks away. After taping, the families held one final planning meeting at Jasmine and Ethan's apartment. No binders were allowed for the first 30 minutes. Carol looked physically uncomfortable. Denise had to leave her phone in the kitchen because she kept trying to add a cousin. Jasmine placed the wedding rules in the center of the table. The guest list was cut to 184. Denise mourned every name. Your cousin Felicia is going to be hurt. Jasmine asked, when did I last see cousin Felicia? Denise thought, 2016, then she will heal. Ethan laughed. Carol got her formal photography schedule. Denise got a 20-minute block called Family Flex Photos. Carol asked what that meant. Denise said, it means people appear. Carol started to ask a follow-up question, then stopped herself. I'm trusting the process. Steve would have been proud. The menu became a compromise nobody expected to work, and almost everybody loved. A plated salad started dinner because Carol insisted people should sit, breathe, and have one calm course. Then the main meal opened into a buffet featuring Reggie's smoked chicken, brisket, macaroni and cheese, roasted vegetables, potatoes, rolls, and 2 sauces based on recipes Marcus Sr. used to make. There was also a vegetarian entree for 3 guests. Reggie complained about it until he tasted it. Then he quietly asked for a second portion. Nobody let him forget that. Steve Harvey on White Weddings vs. Black Weddings dramatized script. DJ Marcus signed a contract. He complained that it contained too many pages. Carol replied that it was 4 pages. Marcus asked whether the text had to be that small. Ethan increased the font. Everyone survived. The timeline changed too. Carol kept the important anchors: ceremony, photographs, dinner, speeches, cake, final transportation. But between 7 and 10, the schedule simply read, music, /dancing, /people be people. Denise framed a screenshot of that line and sent it to Carol. Carol responded with a laughing emoji, which Denise later claimed was a major breakthrough. The wedding day arrived on a bright Saturday in early fall. At 2:50, the Miller relatives began arriving. At 3:05, Uncle Gary was already seated. At 3:18, Reggie found him and asked whether he was guarding the chairs. Gary said, I'm on time. Reggie said, for a wedding that starts in 42 minutes? Gary replied, that's what on time means. Reggie shook his head and took a picture of him alone in the ceremony room. He sent it to the family group chat with the caption, Gary has opened the building. By 3:40, nearly all the Miller relatives were seated. By 3:52, most of the Brooks family had arrived. At 3:58, Carol looked toward the entrance. Denise saw her. Don't say it. Carol smiled. I didn't say anything. Your eyebrows said something. My eyebrows are neutral. They looked scheduled. Both women started laughing. At 4:06, the ceremony began. 6 minutes late. Steve Harvey on White Weddings vs. Black Weddings dramatized script. Carol did not mention it once. Denise noticed. That was the first real sign the compromise had become more than a joke. Jasmine walked down the aisle carrying a small photograph of her father attached to her bouquet. Denise covered her mouth. Ethan waited at the front, crying before Jasmine reached him. Reggie whispered to Gary, you crying? Gary whispered back, no, your face wet. Allergies inside? Strong flowers. Reggie nodded. Peach flowers dangerous. Gary tried not to laugh during the vows. After the ceremony came photographs. Carol's list worked beautifully for the first 15 minutes. Bride and groom. Parents, grandparents, siblings, wedding party. Immediate family. Then came family flex photos. Carol handed the clipboard to Denise. Your turn. Denise smiled. All aunties. 11 women appeared. Carol counted. Jasmine whispered, 3 are cousins. Carol whispered back, I am not asking questions. Steve would have called that growth too. Cocktail hour lasted 68 minutes. Steve Harvey on White Weddings versus Black Weddings dramatized script. Carol survived. Dinner started at 6:12. Denise survived. The plated salad arrived first. Reggie looked at it suspiciously. Carol watched him take a bite. Well? He chewed slowly. It ain't bad. That's all I get? Don't get greedy. Then the buffet opened. Gary tried Reggie's brisket and returned for seconds. Reggie saw him. Careful, insurance man. That's flavor. Gary said, I recognize flavor. You learning. I had barbecue before I met you. Not emotionally. The dinner tables around them broke into laughter. The speeches began at 7:02. Tom spoke for 4 minutes and 47 seconds. Carol did not time him. Megan did. The crowd laughed when she announced it. Then Reggie stood. Carol whispered to Denise, How long? Denise said depends. Carol closed her eyes. Reggie spoke for 11 minutes. He told one childhood story about Jasmine, one story about Marcus Sr., one story about meeting Ethan, and somehow ended with a warning about dry chicken. When he sat down, Carol applauded. That was actually good. Steve Harvey on White Weddings versus Black Weddings dramatized script. Reggie nodded. You sound surprised. I am learning to manage expectations. At 7:36, DJ Marcus played a song that had not been scheduled. Denise froze. Carol looked at the timeline, then at Denise, then at the dance floor. She placed the paper face down. Go, Denise smiled. You sure? A plate can wait, a song can't. Denise screamed. She ran to the dance floor. Reggie nearly fell out of his chair. Carol said it. Within seconds, half the Brooks family was dancing. Then Megan joined. Then Ethan. Then Tom. Gary remained seated. Reggie found him. No, sir, Gary shook his head. I'm eating. Plate can wait. You people have weaponized that phrase. Reggie pulled him up. Gary entered the dance floor cautiously, watching everyone's feet. Stop studying. Reggie shouted. I'm learning the pattern. There ain't no exam. 30 seconds later, Gary was doing a stiff but enthusiastic two-step in the middle of a circle. He attempted something resembling a moonwalk on carpet. It did not work. Steve Harvey on White Weddings vs. Black Weddings dramatized script. The circle screamed anyway. Someone recorded the whole thing. Later, when producers showed Steve the video, he watched it twice and shouted, Insurance man got coverage. The anniversary dance came next. Married couples filled the floor. 1 year. 5 years. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. Couples gradually stepped away. Grandma Evelyn remained, but alone. For a moment, she looked toward the empty space beside her where her husband would have stood. Then Denise walked out and took her hand. Jasmine joined them. Carol came too. Soon both families surrounded Evelyn as the music continued. She danced with her daughter, granddaughter, future in-laws, and people who had spent months arguing over where that dance would fit. When it ended, Evelyn pointed at Carol. See? Worth the time. Carol nodded, crying, worth the time. Then Evelyn looked at Denise. And it started exactly when it was supposed to. The whole circle burst out laughing. At 8:40, the cake was cut. There were also cookies, pie, and brownies. Grandma Evelyn tried all 4 desserts. Megan caught her. I thought cake was enough. Evelyn nodded. I was wrong. Steve Harvey on White Weddings vs. Black Weddings dramatized script. Megan gasped dramatically. Somebody record this. Evelyn pointed her fork. Don't get disrespectful. The reception ended at 11, meaning the contract ended at 11, meaning Carol thought people would begin leaving around 11. At 11:08, she looked around. Almost nobody was moving. She found Denise. Is this normal? Denise smiled. They're saying goodbye. How long does goodbye take? Depends. Carol started laughing before Denise finished the word. At 11:24, the final group left the ballroom. At 11:31, Reggie and two cousins were carrying leftover food to cars. Gary appeared holding a small take-home container. Reggie pointed at him. "Look at you." Gary said, "The brisket was good." "Say it louder, the brisket was good." Reggie hugged him. Carol came out carrying 2 dessert boxes. Denise stared. "Miss Carol Miller." Carol smiled. The family provided containers. Very organized. Denise nearly dropped her purse laughing. Grandma Evelyn appeared last. She was carrying a centerpiece. Jasmine stared at her. "Grandma," Evelyn said, "it was on the table. That does not mean it's yours." Steve Harvey on White Weddings versus Black Weddings dramatized script. Nobody stopped me. Carol looked at Denise. "Do we say something?" Denise shook her head. "You want to?" Carol considered it. "No." Grandma Evelyn walked away smiling. 3 months later, both families returned to the Family Feud stage for a short follow-up segment. Steve Harvey walked out holding a stack of wedding photographs. The audience cheered. He looked at Denise and Carol standing together. "Well, look at this. Y'all still speaking." Denise laughed. "Most days." Carol nodded. "Progress." Steve held up the first photo. It showed Uncle Gary in the center of the dance floor, knees bent, arms out, surrounded by laughing Brooks cousins. Gary covered his face. Steve stared at the picture. "What is this?" Gary said, "I was pressured." Reggie shouted from the audience. He loved it. Steve looked at Gary. "You look like you're trying to escape a revolving door." The audience exploded. Gary laughed. "I was learning." "Learning what?" "The steps." Steve shook his head. "You ain't got to understand dancing before you dance. That's the problem." He held up a second photo. Carol and Denise were dancing together, both laughing so hard they had their eyes closed. Steve looked at them. "What happened here?" Carol smiled. "I stopped checking the schedule." Denise said, "And I stopped checking whether everybody else was having fun." Steve Harvey on White Weddings versus Black Weddings dramatized script. Steve blinked. "You stopped worrying about fun?" "Because I was having it." The audience applauded. Steve held up a third photo. Grandma Evelyn was sitting at her assigned table. Steve stared at it. "Now this is the real miracle." Evelyn nodded. "I stayed there all through salad." Carol said she moved before dinner. Evelyn replied, "The plant was too close." Jasmine shouted, "There was no plant." The audience roared. Steve held up one more photograph. Carol was leaving the venue with 2 dessert boxes. Denise pointed at the photo. "There it is." Steve looked at Carol. "You took food home?" Carol nodded. "There were leftovers." Steve turned toward Reggie. Reggie raised both fists in victory. "We got her." The studio exploded. Steve laughed until he had to wipe his eyes. Then he called Jasmine and Ethan forward. 3 months married. "How's it going?" Jasmine smiled. "Great," Ethan nodded. "Really good. Y'all argue?" "Of course," Jasmine said. Steve nodded. "Thank you. I get worried when people say no." The audience laughed. "What do y'all argue about?" Jasmine pointed at Ethan. "Socks." Steve remembered immediately. The independent